All right, so are you ready for this? We're diving into the world of TransMedics today. This company is revolutionizing organ transplants, but their stock just took a major hit. We're going to break down whether this is a buying opportunity or a sign of trouble ahead. Our source for this deep dive is a Motley Fool article. It's called One Top Growth Stock Down 50% to Buy After Its Recent Pullback. And it was published just yesterday, November 4th, 2024, by Josh Klon Lindquist. So TransMedics, they've developed this thing called the Organ Care System, or OCS, and it's a total game changer. Instead of packing organs in ice for transport, the OCS keeps them functioning. It's like hitting pause on an organ's deterioration, keeping it warm, oxygenated, and perfused. But get this, their stock recently plummeted by 50%. So is this a chance to buy low? Or is it a warning sign that something's wrong? What's really fascinating to me is that they're not just innovating in the medical tech space, they're actually building out their own air fleet to transport these organs. It's some serious commitment to their mission. I'm super curious to hear what you think about all this.
Well, it's amazing how TransMedics is taking on two huge challenges at the same time. On one hand, they're pushing the boundaries of medical technology with this OCS. And on the other hand, they're building this complex logistical network to get these organs where they need to be fast. It's like a high-tech delivery service for life-saving organs.
I was reading about their mission, and they basically want to completely change how we do organ transplants, moving away from the traditional cold storage, which honestly seems a bit outdated when you think about it. Imagine transporting organs in a way that keeps them closer to how they function inside the body. That's what TransMedics is going for. And their revenue growth has been absolutely insane, like 13 times what it was just 3 years ago. But then their stock dropped about 30% after their Q3 results showed slower growth than people expected. That's going to make investors nervous.
Yeah, I can see why investors might be a little freaked out by a drop like that. But before everyone starts panicking, we need to take a closer look. Is this just a little blip, or is it the start of a bigger trend? That's the real question. The author of the article seems to think it's just a temporary setback, but yeah, definitely something to watch.
Okay, so let's talk about their market share for a sec. The article mentions that TransMedics has tripled its market share for heart, lung, and liver transplants here in the U.S., and this happened in just 2 years. They went from a tiny 6% to a whopping 20%.
Wow, that's a huge jump. That kind of market dominance suggests they're on their way to becoming the industry standard, and you know what that means. A barrier to entry for competitors, basically building a moat around their business. That's a really good sign for a company's long-term potential.
Hold on, they tripled their market share in just 2 years. How is that even possible?
Well, think about it this way. In 2022, they did about 1,000 transplants, right? But this year, they're on track to do 3,750. That's incredible growth. And it's probably because their OCS technology is so effective, they're expanding like crazy, and more transplant centers are recognizing their work.
That's a mind-blowing jump. But then there's this 3% dip in U.S. revenue in Q3. They're saying it's because organ donations decreased a bit. What do you think? Blip or something to worry about?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally possible that the organ donation dip is temporary. But there could be other factors at play, too. We'll have to keep an eye on how TransMedics performs in the coming quarters to get a clearer picture.
You know what really stood out to me? TransMedics is already profitable. And not just that, they're actually generating positive cash flow. That's pretty rare for a company growing this fast and investing so much in its network, especially with 18 jets and a new command center.
That's a really good point. You know, most companies in this kind of hyper-growth phase burn through cash like crazy to fuel their expansion. But the fact that TransMedics is already generating positive cash flow is a really strong sign. It suggests they have a very efficient business model, which is great news for potential investors.
And the article compares TransMedics' potential profitability to Intuitive Surgical, the medical device giant with a 29% net profit margin.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. I mean, Intuitive Surgical is incredibly successful, and their high profit margins show just how strong their position is in the market and how innovative their products are. The article seems to be suggesting that TransMedics could eventually reach a similar level of profitability. Of course, it's still early days, but it's a really exciting possibility.
So the article lays out 2 scenarios for how TransMedics might be valued in 2028, and they're both pretty exciting. The first one, which they call conservative, assumes they'll hit 8,000 transplants, basically doubling their revenue. They also predict a 15% net profit margin, leading to a price-to-earnings ratio of 23. Now, let me quickly explain what that means for our listener. The price to earnings ratio, or PE ratio, basically tells you how much investors are willing to pay for every dollar of profit a company makes. A lower PE ratio can sometimes mean that a company is undervalued. Okay, so back to those scenarios. The second scenario, which they call ambitious, predicts TransMedics will reach their goal of 10,000 transplants, and they'll achieve a 20% net profit margin, pushing their price to earnings ratio up to 14. These numbers really jump out at me. It seems like TransMedics could be significantly undervalued right now, especially if they hit those ambitious targets. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely a compelling story. TransMedics is right at the intersection of groundbreaking technology, a rapidly growing market, and the potential to save lives. But, like any investment, especially in a high-growth company, there are risks involved. Maybe we should talk about those a bit later to give our listener a balanced perspective. I mean, it's great to be excited about the possibilities, but it's equally important to understand the potential challenges they might face. You're right, it's important to understand the risks. So let's unpack those a bit. When a company is innovating like TransMedics, especially in healthcare, there are things they just can't control.
Okay, so like what? What are the big risks we should be aware of?
Well, one of the biggest is the organ donation rate. I mean, they can have the most amazing technology in the world, but if there aren't enough organs, their growth is going to be limited. Remember that dip in Q3 revenue? It's a little taste of that, but it's still too early to say if it's a long-term problem.
So they're kind of dependent on a supply chain they can't fully control.
Exactly. They can't just create more organs. They're at the mercy of external factors.
Right.
And then there's the whole regulatory landscape. Healthcare is super regulated. So getting approval for new organs or new uses for their technology can take forever. It's a long and expensive process with no guarantee of success.
So even if they wanted to, say, expand into kidney transplants, it's not just a matter of flipping a switch. They'd have to convince regulators that their tech is safe and effective for kidneys specifically. That takes time and money.
You got it. And we can't forget about competition. Sure, TransMedics is leading the pack right now, but there are other companies out there trying to get a piece of this market. There's always the risk that a competitor could come up with something better or a cheaper solution. This industry is constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's a race to innovate, for sure.
Absolutely. And then there are the financial risks. TransMedics is pouring money into growth, which can mean taking on debt and maybe even diluting existing shareholders. Basically, when a company issues more shares, the ownership stake of current shareholders goes down. If they don't execute their plan flawlessly, these financial moves could backfire.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope, balancing this huge potential with some very real challenges. So for someone thinking about investing in TransMedics, what's the takeaway here?
Well, I think the takeaway is that TransMedics is a high-risk, high-reward situation.
High risk, high reward. I like that. Not for the faint of heart, but if they succeed, the payoff could be huge.
Exactly. There's massive potential for growth, but you got to go in with your eyes wide open. Do your research, understand the company, know your investment goals, and most importantly, know your own risk tolerance.
This deep dive is really showing just how complex this situation is. What do you think is the most crucial factor for TransMedics' success? The make or break element.
If I had to pick just one, I'd say it's their ability to execute their growth strategy.
So they need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right. They need to keep growing your market share, break into new markets, develop new uses for their OCS tech, and they need to do all of this while being smart with their money. It's a lot to ask, but their history suggests they can do it.
Let's zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture. We're talking about a company that could change how organ transplants are done forever. What could that mean for healthcare as a whole?
The implications are enormous. Imagine shorter waiting lists for transplants, more lives saved, and a better quality of life for people who receive transplants. That's the kind of impact TransMedics could have.
That's a powerful vision.
It really is. TransMedics is at the forefront of this potential healthcare revolution. If they can keep improving their technology and expanding their network, they could completely reshape organ transplantation as we know it.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around the potential ripple effects.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Now, speaking of expansion, the article mentioned they've started dipping their toes into international markets.
Oh, so they're going beyond the U.S. Makes sense. I mean, the need for organ transplants is everywhere.
Right. They've made some progress, but there's still a huge untapped market out there.
Where?
Going global is going to be key for their long-term growth.
But it's not as simple as just selling their devices in other countries, right? They'll need to build up their network in those new markets, too.
Absolutely. It's a big undertaking. They'll need to build relationships with hospitals and transplant centers in those new regions, hire and train local staff, and they might even need to expand their air fleet to serve those new locations.
And I imagine every country has its own rules and logistical
You
challenges.
got it. International expansion is never easy, but for a company with a global mission like TransMedics, it's a must.
All right, we've talked about a lot: their tech, their growth, their finances, their expansion plans, even the risks. But there's one more piece to this puzzle we need to look at: the competition. Are there other companies trying to do what TransMedics is doing?
There are definitely other players in the organ preservation field, but TransMedics is generally considered the leader. They have the most advanced tech, the biggest market share, and the most complete network. They've set the bar high.
So they're the ones to beat, but that doesn't mean they can just sit back and relax, right?
Definitely not. There are always new companies popping up trying to shake things up.
Like who? Any examples we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, there's this company called Vio Perfusion. They're developing a portable lung perfusion system. They're still in the early stages, but their tech could be a game changer for lung transplants.
So they're focusing specifically on lungs, while TransMedics is taking a broader approach covering multiple organs.
Exactly. And then there's Organox. They're working on a normothermic machine perfusion system for livers. Now, I know that sounds a little technical, so let me break it down.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so normothermic basically means maintaining normal body temperature. So imagine a device that not only keeps the liver cold, but actually pumps warm, oxygenated blood through it, kind of like mimicking the conditions inside the body. That's what normothermic machine perfusion is all about.
So it's like the OCS, but specifically for livers?
Precisely. So yeah, TransMedics has some competition, but they're still in the lead for now. But they can't afford to get complacent. They need to keep innovating to stay ahead of the game.
It's like a high-stakes race, but the prize is saving lives.
That's a great way to put it. It really captures the urgency and importance of what they're doing.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. What are your key takeaways from all of this?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that TransMedics has a bold vision, and they have the potential to really change the world. They're not just making a product. They're building a whole new system for organ transplantation.
And they're doing it while facing all these challenges: scientific, logistical, financial, competitive.
It's a huge undertaking.
But for me, it always comes back to the human element. Every transplant they help with represents a life saved, a family given hope, a second chance. That's what makes their work so remarkable.
That's what it's all about. Beyond the numbers and the projections, there are real people whose lives are being touched by this technology.
And that's what makes this whole story so captivating.
I couldn't agree more.
So what's next for TransMedics? What should we be watching for in the coming months and years?
Well, their next earnings report will be under a microscope, especially after that dip in Q3. Investors will be looking for signs of a comeback and continued growth.
Everyone will be glued to those numbers. What else should we pay attention to?
I'd say keep an eye on their international expansion. Are they gaining traction in those new markets? Are they able to replicate their U.S. success? And what about new applications for their technology? Are they going beyond hearts, lungs, and livers?
Yeah, that's another exciting area to watch. If they can expand into new organs or new medical uses, it would really open up their market. So there's a lot happening. It's a dynamic and rapidly changing field.
It certainly is.
Well, this deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for what TransMedics is doing. It's been really eye-opening.
I agree. It's been fascinating to take such a close look at this company.
I'm definitely adding them to my watch list.
I think that's a smart move. They're a company to watch.
All right, so we've talked about the company, the technology, the risks, even the competition. And it seems like TransMedics is a company with a ton of potential.
Yeah, they're definitely doing some innovative stuff.
But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. You know, the article focuses on TransMedics' work with organ transplants, but what if this technology could be used for more than that? What if, and this might sound kind of crazy, but what if it could be used to preserve other tissues or even cells?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if they can preserve and transport whole organs, who knows what else might be possible?
Right. And maybe this is getting a little too sci-fi, but what if this technology could even play a role in, something like suspended animation or even long-duration space travel? I know it sounds far-fetched, but the possibilities seem almost endless.
Yeah, you're right. It really makes you wonder what the future holds for this kind of technology.
Right.
If they can keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, Who knows what breakthroughs might be just around the corner?
This deep dive has been amazing, but it feels like we've only just scratched the
I
surface.
totally agree.
TransMedics is a company I'm definitely going to keep my eye on. So, to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of TransMedics. We've explored their groundbreaking technology, their impressive growth, and the potential impact they could have on the future of healthcare. But remember, this is just the beginning. We encourage you to do your own research, dig deeper into the source material, and ultimately decide for yourselves. Is TransMedics a risky bet, or is it a revolutionary investment? Whatever you decide, one thing's for sure. TransMedics is a company worth watching. They're pioneers in a field that's constantly evolving, and we can't wait to see what they do next. Thanks for tuning in to the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.